Hello, my name is Scott Cooper, and I'd like to welcome you to Creek Week. I'm a professor at the University of California, Santa Barbara. I've been there for 40 years, and I retired about 8 years ago. But I still maintain an active research program. So my official title is research professor. Throughout my career, both in teaching and research, I have concentrated on the ecology of streams, including many of our local streams as well as streams in the Sierra Nevada. My original research focused on working out stream food webs, who eats whom, and what impact do predators have on their prey. But more recently, over the last decade, I have concentrated on how wildfires, debris flows, and land use change, like conversion to agricultural or urban land, has affected our streams. One of our study sites is Mission Creek, and we've worked there for about 40 years. And we've sampled sites ranging from Rocky Nook Park and the Natural History Museum all the way up to Seven Falls. We have been studying Mission Creek and its neighbor Rattlesnake Creek, one of its major tributaries, to see how they're responding or recovering from the Hesacita fire. And we've been comparing the biota in those streams to the animals and plants we find in nearby streams that haven't been burned. More recently, we've been using it as sort of a control site to compare to the debris flow streams of Montecito to see what effects the debris flows have had on streams. In addition, over the years, I've led many class field trips there from UCSB. I also did the stream part of the BioBlitz for the Botanic Garden on Mission Creek. And I've also been a mentor, guest lecturer, field trip leader for the Extreme team at the Botanic Gardens. And this is a set of high school students that are both helping the Botanic Gardens, but also learning about the ecology of the habitats that the Botanic Gardens manages. So I thought what I would do today is give you a brief overview of stream ecology in the Santa Barbara area and talk about how streams naturally function, why they house such high biodiversity, and to some degree human impacts on those streams. So I'm going to switch to share screen now, and here we go. Okay, one of the basic principles of stream and watershed ecology is the valley rules the stream. Anything that happens in a valley or what we call the catchment or basin or drainage area that drains into the stream will affect the stream. So by and large, whatever characteristics the valley has and how humans impact those characteristics will have impacts on the physics and chemistry of the stream itself. Now, in natural streams, there are four major factors that affect the characteristics of the stream. One is topography, is it draining mountains or plains, have ridges or slopes, what is the gradient in the basin? And all of the topography affects climate. Of course, here we get a lot of rain in the front range, and we have a kind of rain shadow effect on the back. It affects flow direction, speeds, the amount of erosion that occurs from our watersheds, and so on. Climate, of course, is very important here. We have Mediterranean climates with most of the rain coming in our winters, usually between November and April. And then the rest of the year is dry. We don't get much. So precipitation then. So as a consequence, our streams sometimes flood if there's a lot of rainfall in the winter, and in the summer they come down to what we call base flow, the low constant flow levels, largely fed by springs. Also, the climate, of course, affects temperature, cool in the winter, hotter in the summer, and humidity. The geology of the catchments that drain into streams also affect their water chemistry. A lot of the constituents of the rocks, bedrock, and soils will determine the chemistry of the receiving waters, and also affects the routing of water. If the surfaces are hard or impervious, there'll be a lot more runoff during rain events than if they're deep soils where the water can percolate down through soil horizons. And then finally, vegetation is all important because the roots of trees and native vegetation stabilize the soils, hold it in place. The vegetation itself intercepts rain droplets and prevents impacts on the soil surfaces. And then in addition, there's often leaf litter that builds up under the vegetation that acts as kind of a sponge to absorb a lot of rainwater. So vegetation affects water inputs. It affects water chemistry because there are some dissolved substances that come out of leaves as water percolates through it. And then it affects temperature and shading. Whenever you have shading, temperatures are usually much lower. So here you can see a riparian zone and along a stream, but the uplands are pretty farm. But down here you see you've got this riparian vegetation, mostly trees, that are shading the stream and affecting a lot, as you'll see, that goes on in the stream. Now, in order to understand how then all of these landscape properties that I've just mentioned affect flow, current, substrate, temperature, light, and water chemistry, we need to know what is in these streams. And most of these pictures are local. Many of them, most of the organisms I'm going to show you are ones from Rattlesnake and Mission Creeks. So we have, this is Rattlesnake Creek, as a matter of fact. Here you can see this typical step pool morphology, which means you've got these pools, and then in between these riffles or waterfalls between pools. If the stream is shaded, if there's a lot of vegetation growing alongside the stream, primarily trees, you get a lot of input of leaf litter. So here you see alders, California bay, sycamores, some of our major riparian tree species. They drop leaf litter into the stream, which is attacked by bacteria and fungi. And this amalgam of material, this leaf litter plus all the microbes, the bacteria and fungi, is a rich food source for a lot of the organisms that live in stream. So this leaf litter with its bacteria and fungi is first consumed by what we call shredders. This is a caddisfly. You can only see the head of the beast there, but it makes a kind of house or case out of bits of stick and so on and carries it around. This is a cranefly larvae, but both of these digest and fragment this leaf litter, and they turn into what we call FPOM, which just means fine particulate organic matter. This fine particulate organic matter, some of it is light and small enough that it's carried downstream in the water currents, and there it's intercepted by a set of invertebrates we call collectors. This one up here is called a blackfly larvae, and these larvae have head fans. They stick up into the water column. They're sticky. They string them with saliva, and any of these small particles coming downstream get intercepted on those fans, and then they wipe them off in their mouths, and that's how they consume things. This is a caddisfly that builds a net, a sticky net, and these nets collect this fine organic materials that flows downstream. And these are usually found in faster flowing zones, riffles, where they can intercept particles carried downstream. Some of this fine particulate organic matter also settles out on the bottom, and there it's eaten by a whole set of what we call deposit feeders, because they're eating this fine organic matter that's deposited on the bottom. These include a couple of mayflies here I'm showing you, various kinds of worms, which occur in our streams, and this is a midge larvae. The adults, in fact, except for the worms, all of these insects have a terrestrial adult stage. They can fly around. The adult of the midges look a lot like a mosquito. And, um, and so that will have some implications I'll talk about later. The other part of the food web, where it's shaded, we call this whole detritus-based food web. Detritus just refers to the dead organisms in the stream that are eaten by this set of consumers. The other kind of food chain direction comes from in open streams or streams where there's sufficient light. And here we get a lot of algal growth. So here's a bunch of algae that have sort of outer coverings made of glass, silicon dioxide. They're called diatoms. If you go into a stream and it's slippery with kind of a brown scuzz, that's the diatoms. Then in addition, in very open streams where there's lots of light, you'll often see these big blooms of filamentous green algae. And a lot of people call it moss, but it's not actually moss. It's an alga that gets very large. Now, all of these algae are eaten in turn by a set of grazers. So here we have a caddisfly that makes a case out of stones, another mayfly. There's a snail. Snails are grazers. And this is a caddisfly that actually makes a case out of stones that ends up looking much like a snail. And then this is a beetle larvae called a water penny. Some of you may be familiar with water pennies, but they graze the diatoms off the surface of the rock. And finally, most tadpoles that occur in these streams eat algae. They're algivores. Now, all of these invertebrates, the shredders, the collectors, and the grazers are eaten by various kinds of predators. So we have invertebrate predators. This is a predatory stonefly. This is a dragonfly. That's a damselfly. These are all larvae again. The adults are terrestrial. And then we have some vertebrates that are predatory as well. This is the larvae of the California newt. And then we have trout or steelhead in our streams. So all of these eat all of these invertebrates that are eating algae or detritus. Now the food webs don't end there because there are a variety of semi-aquatic or terrestrial predators that eat these. For example, tadpoles are often eaten by the two-striped garter snake. It's almost a specific relationship. I've often watched garter snakes eating tadpoles, and apparently it's a major dietary item for these snakes. And they often catch the tadpoles, of course, in stream pools. And then again, we all know raccoons, and raccoons will eat anything. They'll eat anything they can catch, the fish, the newts, the newt larvae anyway. The adult newts are toxic, but the larval newts are edible, and sometimes the large invertebrates as well, things like snails. So now, not only are these riparian zones with vegetation important to wildlife as a food source, but they're also migratory corridors. They provide cover for a lot of wildlife, and they're also, the stream itself is a major source of water. So these are biodiversity hotspots. You have this very complicated, complex food web full of many species. Now, another aspect some people don't appreciate is there are many interactions between the stream and the stream-side vegetation or riparian zone. First of all, there are inputs of leaf litter, and then terrestrial vertebrates. A lot of the insects, spiders, and so on that occur in the trees fall into the water, and there they form a major food source of things like trout. In addition, these aquatic insects, they're aquatic as larvae, when they come out, actually fly into the riparian zone, and they become a major food source for riparian predators. Various kinds of birds, bats, dragonflies, spiders, all of these frogs eat these aquatic insects when they merge into the terrestrial adult form. So there's a lot of interactions between the riparian zone and its and the streams. Now, I should mention often the top predators in these streams are trout. And we do have trout in Mission Creek occasionally. Steelhead trout are observed ascending lower Mission Creek. And at spots in this and in Rattlesnake Creek, you also find resident rainbow trout. Well, rainbow trout and steelhead trout are the same species, but they differ in their life cycles in that the steelhead trout, or the steelhead, actually go to the ocean, get big, and come back to the stream, usually where they were born, to spawn. The resident trout actually spend their whole lives in headwaters. So this is the steelhead life cycle. In our local streams, a steelhead adult will move up into the streams. They'll find appropriate spawning habitat, which is well aerated gravel substrate usually. The female will dig a nest, and then she'll lay her eggs in it. It's a depression in the bottom, and the male will add his sperm or milk to that mixture, and then the female goes upstream after the eggs are fertilized, and brushes her tail back and forth so that the hole fills in again with sediment. So the eggs are covered and protected by predators. They hatch out. They spend a bit more time in the gravel, then they emerge and they eat aquatic insects in the stream. The ones that spend their whole life cycle there then go to the adult stage and stay in the stream, whereas the ones that have the seagoing life cycle actually go out to the ocean, usually after 1 or 2 years. They usually spend 2 to 4 years in the ocean, and then once they've reached maturity, they come back into their home streams to spawn. So now, all of these things, I wanted to impress upon you how biodiverse and important these riparian zones and their streams are, and how important they are to endangered species like the Southern California steelhead. In this particular context, we're interested in the effects of road construction. So a lot of my research is focused on land use changes and how they affect our streams and stream food webs. But road construction has more localized but similar effects to land use change. So through road construction, native vegetation is often destroyed, damaged, or thinned. Because now you don't have intercepting vegetation and leaf litter, there is increased runoff during rainstorms, which cause increased erosion from the hill slopes, especially in our steep local watersheds, and increased sediment inputs to the stream. Some of that's carried to the ocean, but on the backside of a storm, you often get a lot of sediment being deposited in the stream. And so by destroying native vegetation, you get often sediment inputs that can blanket the bottom, suffocate bottom substrate. They prevent the penetration of dissolved oxygen, which almost all these animals need, and so make it less hospitable for the animals that live there. Another impact is road construction can reduce shading, and that results in the stream in increased temperatures, lower leaf inputs, and more algae. And then finally, with a lot of the sediment that's pushing the stream, you can get a lot more nutrients that come into the stream and can fuel algal blooms, big masses of algae that grow. These nutrients include nitrogen and phosphorus compounds. In some natural situations, you can also get heavy metals. There are big problems in the Central Valley, for example, with boron and selenium. And then, of course, where there's a lot of human inputs, pharmaceuticals, various kinds of biocides, and so on can become important, but not so important in this context. Direct sediments input to the creek can reduce surface flows. And the way that works is now if you put a lot of sediment of different sizes into the stream, then instead of flowing over the top, the water will often flow underneath the substrate, underneath the large boulders and rock. So there's less surface flow. Now that can prevent the downstream transport of fine organic material, so you lose your collectors. And it also blocks fish migration when these, what we call anadromous or seagoing steelhead come upstream. it can block their migrations because there's no surface flow. So there's a lot of implications of affecting flow patterns. Another big one is that pools are really important in these streams because they're the summer habitat for trout or steelhead, but also for the newts, for tadpoles that belong to some of our tree frog and red-leg frog species, for a lot of the predators I showed. So pools are all important for maintaining the biodiversity, and when they're filled in with debris, with rocks and boulders and finer sediment, then you lose that habitat and you lose the diversity that goes with it. And finally, if there's a lot of fine sediment as the rocks are broken down or sand is included in the mix, they can clog or smother bottom substrate, creating these effects I talked about later, where it can make an inhospitable environment for the animals that live within the sediment. So I hope that's given you a bit of an overview of how these streams work, what occurs in them, how biodiverse they are, and a little bit about the human impacts of road construction on them. Thank you very much for your time.